one of the things I love about this story is that it is such a strong, powerful, familiar story in the respect of we know this happens. We know this is, that's self-evident, but we haven't seen it on the screen. And that I thought that was like wow, good choice. And so I was like, tell me about how you came to that story.
So the story is inspired by my aunt and uncle. My uncle came to the U.S. in the mid-90s on a student visa, and with every intention of bringing my aunt and their then infant son right behind them. And it's 2020, and they're still applying for visas, still hopeful that something's going to happen. And, I've seen the impact that it's had on them as a unit, having spent all these years apart. And not just them, but on the family at large, where, it's been very difficult to support that decision. And they've had to turn into different people in order to stay hopeful and to continue having this dream of being a family. And so, so it was sort of the inspiration was around, well, what would happen if the visa was no longer an issue? And they had to come together at that point. Who are they? And what have they become? And what are the crutches that they've been relying on all this time that are no longer applicable in, current situation? And so that's sort of where, that was the inspiration. That's where this story started, and my imagination of what these people would have to journey through in order to form the family that they had dreamed of for so long.
And I'm going to ask all the cast this. Tell me about what you responded to in the script. Was it anything you'd seen before? Because, again, for me as a viewer, I've not seen this story on the screen before.
I saw it as a classic love story, but seen through this other lens. There's so many, the classic love stories, there's some obstacle between the couple, between the two people. This time it's seen through this other lens that we're talking about. And so for me, it was refreshing, and it just really delves into like how love is also sometimes in your imagination. It's like they don't have a physical, they're not in each other's space, so for 17 years this relationship existed in their imagination, so to speak. So we get to see the reality and their imagination sort of clash. And that for me was spectacular.
Yeah, I found it to be a classic love story too, but also there was something so familiar about it, just because I'm also from an immigrant family, and I do have relatives who are waiting for a partner or a spouse to go over. In my case, it's Britain and Europe, waiting for someone's visa to come through, and years go by where, it's the dream and the imagination of what the relationship is that keeps it going. And sometimes, unfortunately, it doesn't hold up to the reality for some people. It doesn't go as well.
Yeah. And for me, it was the intimacy I found in the script, and how relatable it is for people to understand and feel the distance that they're having to overcome, and how that's not going to come naturally just because you are a family, but you've been separated for 17 years. That is like an unimaginable burden that you don't think of, or I don't think of when I think about the immigrant story. And the intimacy which the script had for that really compelled me to it.
Yeah, the script felt very lived in.
Yeah.
Tell me, and like you're kind of a miracle baby in terms of, like you were saying at the premiere last night, that last year you were vowing to come back here the next year with a film, and by God you did.
Yes, ma'am.
And so, but okay, so how'd that happen? I mean, that's because that really is that's extraordinary, just in sheer physics in terms of getting a movie made in that amount of time, much less an independent film. So so what got you there?
I think, I don't want to say naivete, because I don't like to think of my producer as being naive, but I do think that there's an element of having worked in the indie space for a really long time, where you gather your friends, gather your resources, and just do the thing. Like we don't have time to wait. We're just doing the thing. You know, and so we started working on the script. When we got into the first development labs, I didn't have a script. We just had this idea that we were like pitching, it's going to be this great story, but I didn't actually have a script yet. And then we finally, you know, got into a lab and worked on the script. I mean, it actually took a year of pitching the story without a script, and then got into Sundance Screenwriters Lab, still without a script that we'd shown to anybody, and people were just excited about the synopsis, essentially. And you know, and all the things that we had figured out in terms of budget at that point, et cetera. And even then, with our initial budget, because a lot of it was based off of favors and friends and in-kind donations and things of that nature. And you know, one of our first co-producer collaborators, when he came on and asked us the budget, the number that we told him, he was like, "Please don't tell anybody that number. That's ridiculous."
Because
Don't say that,
high or
because it was too low. It's like, don't say that, please.
You have no idea what you're doing.
Let's not say that in public.
That's great.
And so by the time this time last year when we were here, I'd just come out of the lab, so I had a firmer idea of what I was doing with the script, but I still didn't have a script to show anybody yet. And so we just had a great pitch, and we had our budget, and we had all our ducks aligned in that regard, and just sort of like sheer will force. And I think the excitement was infectious, where people were like, all right, you know, it sounds like they're coming. And so we just kind of moved forward with the anticipation of this is going to happen, you know. So we started casting right when we left, and like, this is going to happen. We know we need a Walter, we know we need a Sylvia, we know we need an Esther. We'll get back to you to exactly what they're going to say.
Yeah, did you have a script yet?
When we started casting, no, we didn't quite have the script yet. Or I was still rewriting. I was still rewriting literally into like the first week of pre-production.
Do you mean for the short or the feature?
For the feature. When we first started putting out our casting
You had
calls.
a script for the short a long time.
Yeah, but the script
Yeah.
for the short was 4 pages long.
Yeah.
Most of which had no dialogue whatsoever. So it was literally sheer brute force and will force that kind of got us there. And even in terms of our pre-production, you know, because there was some indecision about, like, are we going to start? Are we ready? Is it time? Is it, you know, do we have all the money, et cetera? And Haria, my co-producer, was like, we're just going to show up at the office. Monday, we're just showing up at the office. And we showed up at our co-producer's office, and we're like, we're here. We're starting pre-production. Today's the day. And
Right.
we're like, all right, we're starting pre-production.
I love it.
Today's the day.
And we're here.
Yes.
Let's go. Where? Where? Let's just go.
We're just going.
We're just going.
And that's literally how it went, you know. And
Amazing.
and so people were just kind of, oh, the train's moving. And so, you know, everyone jumped on. And I think in order to sustain that is why I'm saying it. I don't want to say it's naivete, because
Right.
it can be naive to just decide that, but you do, in order to sustain it and see it through, you do have to have a plan and some sort of expertise. And, you know, we had an incredible team together who loved us and loved the story and, you know, loved everybody who came around to make it happen. And so that's what got us through.
It's your first film, but I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of you.
Awesome.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, me.
What kinds of stories do you want to tell?
I just love people-centric stories, you know, stories that focus on humanity, stories that focus on relationships, and that doesn't necessarily mean romantic relationships, although that's lovely. But, you know, filial relationships as well, and partnerships and relationship with self, etc. It's just something I feel like we haven't seen enough of, is the lives of people of color in particular, the lives of women, lives of immigrants, lives of, you know, just there's so many holes and gaps to fill at this point. We really could go on for a long time. And, you know, not to discount Disney or Marvel or anybody else, because I think those are also what makes those stories alive for people, are those exact things, you know, the relationships that the Incredible Hulk has with whoever else. I've never watched it, but anyhow. So that's what I can say is what I'm looking forward to spending a lot of my time and energy doing.